Hey, what's up, Casey? Oh my God. And Mike's here too. Are you you're connecting to audio? Hey, Mike.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. What do I do about that? How's everybody there in this sweltering
Oh my
countryside?
God. I was gonna say, do I look like I'm sweating? Because I am.
You do. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it's
you are.
today's supposed to be the cool day,
Uh-huh.
and it's already up to almost 90 degrees. Looks like it's
Wow.
gonna top out at 95.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I just read the weather report. It's horrific.
yeah, it's bad. And it's, I mean, supposedly Monday it's gonna be 111 degrees.
Yeah,
Oh God.
Is
this is truly insane.
Yeah, I mean, I had to Google sort of hottest temperatures ever in New York City and New Jersey just to see whether or not I'd ever, experienced anything even close to that hot. And it's like, I guess there were a couple days when I was living in New York City when it got up to like 102 or 103. But I
Hmm.
mean, this is like almost 10 degrees hotter.
And that's not in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Crazy.
And aren't you traveling on Tuesday or Wednesday or something?
Yeah, we leave Tuesday for the East Coast. So heading out to the Jersey Shore.
Yeah. So maybe that's good. You escape.
Yeah, it should be. We're going to be right on the beach, so
Oh,
even if it's hot in New Jersey, it'll still be cooler at the beach.
like beach, like swimming kind of beach.
Yeah, like ocean, you can actually go in without a wetsuit.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm
wonderful.
excited.
Well,
Um,
I'd say your exit is well timed.
yeah. Let me just. I'm gonna make you a co-host. Just.
Well, let me tell you what I'm thinking before. And Casey, you're there, right? Is Casey
I
there?
am, yes.
Okay. Hi, Casey.
Hello.
So, Alex and I exchanged thoughts about how to do this. The film is 38 minutes long, and I think what I'd like to do is do some dialogue right at the beginning before they watch it. Um, and then leave about, if possible, maybe 10 minutes at the end. Um, but Alex, have you thought something? What do you think?
Uh, I'm game for whatever, as always. My only reservation is that I'm not sure whether or not there's an actual host for this panel. Like I'm doing Casey. I'm sort of doing the thing Casey did for the LSP projects. I think there
Mhm.
might actually be someone who I reached out to Connor Casey today to see whether or not they'd tap someone um, to
No,
actually.
there's not, Alex. It's just, I mean, normally it would be me, and it's just that because I suddenly went out of state, I didn't know if I'd even be available to do this.
Sure, sure.
So that's why. But if I'd be quite happy, I've got a couple of ulterior motives, and I'm glad Casey is with us because um, my ulterior motive is that next year I'm going to do some seminars on nonviolence and curriculum, and I'd like to find if out of this audience whether there are some people that might want to be involved in how to use nonviolence as a teaching method in organizing or education, either one.
Nice.
So I'd like to prime them up with that, like
Sure,
be
yeah.
thinking about this, and then if and then at the end, see if anybody is interested in that and any questions at the end.
That
And
sounds great.
and I'm asking Casey, since he's with us, to be responsible to, like, if some people are, to get their information in the chat or something so we can get back in touch with them.
Okay, so like, are you gonna ask if people are interested for them to post in the chat and then I can make a list?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I've deputized you, Casey. You're now a co-host as well.
Thank you.
We're all in this one together. So did you? I mean, I have the little intro that they must have prepared for the conference itself. So I guess I'll just kind of read that and then sort of hand the mic over to you, Mike, for some opening thoughts before we screen the film. And then we've only got an hour, so it's kind of
Yeah.
I'll try to keep things as
So you've got to be a timekeeper. So don't let me go too long to cut into the film. And we want to have, so, keep track on your phone or something, but we want to have maybe 10 minutes at the end.
Sounds good.
And one other thing is we're on a tornado watch here while you guys are in a drought. We're in a tremendous rain that won't stop. And
Okay.
so it's a possibility that I won't be there at the end. And so you guys just have to pick up that slack.
Nice. Jesus, how
I
besides,
might be in the basement or something.
besides the impending tornado, how's the weather been out there?
It was beautiful the first week. It was really nice. And then starting about 4 days ago, it started raining and just keeps raining. And it's going to rain the whole next week. So the whole second part of the time I'm here,
Oh,
it's raining.
That's a bummer, but at least you get to see. So you've got siblings that are still out there.
Yeah, my brother and my sister are both here. So we haven't seen each other in 2 years.
That's cool.
So, and we've got neighbors and friends and stuff like that.
Nice. Yeah, the trip east, I've got my we're going to see my grandma, who I haven't seen in almost 3 years. And in that interim, she's become obsessed with Elvis, which is like
Oh,
strange to me because it's not she's not necessarily someone who was ever into Elvis, in years 1 through 90. So we've rented an Elvis impersonator to show up at the house to sort of serenade her. And that, me and my dad set that up. But then I've got like an added wrinkle. I got an Elvis costume for Bud, and he's gonna bust out. Actually, like I get, he's been working on a couple Elvis songs, so
oh, I bet.
yeah, pretty wild.
I think he can do a good job of it, actually, just thinking about it.
Yeah, he's pretty talented. He's got the gift for he's got some charisma for sure. Told you,
Yeah.
he just had his 10th birthday, and the one thing he wanted was a tuxedo.
Oh,
Natural showman.
yeah. He's gonna put grease in his hair or something to be Elvis.
Danica got him a sort of a pompadour wig.
Oh,
Yeah, and he's got the sort of spandex jumpsuit. He's going to be playing like a mid 70s Elvis. He's got the
so he needs to be a little overweight.
yeah, he's got the physique for it. He hasn't really shot up yet, so he's kind of got a little pot belly on him.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Casey, how's everything with you? So we haven't talked for a couple of weeks.
It's been good. I've been working a lot. I don't know if I told you, but at the last day of the quarter, there are 4 of us student technicians, and 2 of those technicians quit on the last day of the quarter with no notice. And so I've been working double shifts for the past few weeks until I can train people to take their place. So I've been working a lot, but it's good. I'm making money, so that's nice.
Yeah, you're making double money, right?
Yeah, something like that.
We need to talk too, Casey, about summer projects, because I've got some money for you as well.
Oh, cool.
So eventually, once it stops being over 100 degrees.
Yeah.
And are we going to publicize those courses on that nice flyer you made? How do we get that around?
I reached out to Brian Anderson over in Advancement, and there was someone else on the call whose name but he recommended, at least for now, I mean, he had some good ideas in terms of like contacting the advisors ASAP while students are still registering for the fall, and then doing maybe toward the end of the summer kind of a real like media blitz. Maybe do a hook up with Eric Wilson Edge over in Advancement and do a podcast. I mean, Eric's been reaching out for a while about like putting together something like a big story on us, and I think
Mhm.
strategically it would probably make more sense to wait until like August or September because people just kind of tune out over the summer.
Mhm.
I know I'm trying my best to tune out.
Yeah. Well, that's fine with me.
Yeah, so I
As
think
long as we have a plan.
exactly. Yeah, so I think for right now, I've been meaning to shoot an email over to Karin, and then just like the general undergraduate advisors to get it
Yeah.
on their radar. I mean, because Brian was talking about, he could put it up on like the TVs on campus, but nobody's on campus right now, so it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. But the advisors could do something, presumably,
Exactly.
even during the summer.
Yeah, and
Possibly.
those, I mean, my classes, those classes fill regardless. I'd just like to have them full of the students who really want to, um, have that kind of like, prolonged deep dive into the topic and to take, the other classes too. So
Mhm.
I think, and not to get away from the presentation that's about to start in a minute, but Michelle set up that certification or the certificate program surrounding her seminar series,
Mhm.
which is, I mean, it's sort of a piece of paper. It doesn't mean much, but it's it might be something to kind of target next year.
Yeah.
Students who take, X number of courses and participate in however many seminars, they get this sort of like labor studies certificate.
Well, that's what they were doing in Seattle before they had, they don't have a major in labor studies. So they have courses. Now they're getting a minor in labor studies. We're way ahead of them. But before that, I think they were doing a certification in labor studies. And that's, something on your transcript that's useful.
Yeah. I mean, it at least acknowledges the kind of attention you've paid to this specific thing.
Yeah.
So we've
Can
got,
when we start, can we see who all is with us among participants? And maybe, I don't know if we can even take a moment to just have people identify themselves.
sure. Yeah, we've got, it looks like 4 people in here, Tom Gerard, Christopher Powell, somebody named Brent, and then Bob Rossi, I recognize.
Mhm.
He's been to,
If we can get a view screen where we can see everybody and just go around real quickly, that would be nice. And then I would have a couple things to say to them, and I know who I'm talking to.
okay, cool. Casey, is there any way as co-host you can like expand the view to include, well, I guess not everybody's in the call yet.
Yes, and that's kind of on a like each individual basis. If you go, well, I'm on a PC, so I don't know if it looks different on a Mac. But if you go up to the top right of the Zoom window, there should be a view button where you can switch between speaker and gallery view.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, gallery view is what you want.
Okay.
I
Well, I'm
just
gonna go
went to
ahead and
gallery,
let
so
everyone in. Okay. Let's see.
yeah, why don't we go ahead? It's time.
It's been a while since I've run a Zoom call.
Hmm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation of Love and Solidarity, which is produced. We have a very pleased to introduce and hear from the producer of the film, Michael Honey, who's also a colleague of mine over at University of Washington Tacoma. Mike's was the former Harry Bridges Chair of Labor Studies at the University of Washington. He's the author of 6 books on labor and civil rights and Martin Luther King studies. Is currently working on a piece of scholarship that blends sort of history and autobiography about his own sort of life and experience in the movement. He's the Haley Professor of Humanities here at UWT, but he's also, as of this year, I'm not sure if it's officially concluded yet, but he was not with us this past year because he was a Radcliffe Fellow at Harvard University. So we are extremely pleased to welcome Mike. We're going to screen Love and Solidarity, which is about 38 minutes or so. And I realize we only have about an hour, so we want to save at least 10 minutes at the end of the screening for a little Q&A. But Mike also had some thoughts that he wanted to share before we got into the film that might help sort of situate our understanding of Lawson, his ongoing work, and just sort of the idea of nonviolence and how that might sort of factor into our classrooms for those of us who are educators here. So without further ado, allow me to introduce my friend and colleague, Mike Honey.
Okay, can you hear me all right? Is this coming through?
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'm in Michigan where it's raining all the time. Instead of you all baking in the Pacific Northwest, we're getting drenched, and we may even have a tornado. So I'm not sure if I'll be here at the end of the call, but I think I will. Might be in the basement. I wonder if people could turn your video on and even your audio just for a minute to see who all is here. Oh, hello, Tom, Christopher, Bob, Maria, hi.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Brian, and Brent. Hi, Brent. So Maria, we've been trying to meet ever since you moved to Tacoma, and maybe when I get back, we'll pull it off.
Yeah, that would be great. Otherwise, we can catch up later, but it's nice to see you on the screen at least. Hope you're staying safe.
I'm trying.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So good. I'm glad to actually, I don't know, I don't think we've ever met before. Maria came out of the history department in Seattle. So I thought maybe I've met her, but I don't think so. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen you many times and I've been a longtime fan. So it's a delight to see you finally in person and to meet you face to face, even though we're on video, unfortunately.
Well, everybody, so here's the thing about this film. It's a practical thing. The reason we made the film is to tell the story, not of James Lawson only, but of the movements that he was a part of, which includes the civil rights movement and the labor movement and immigrant rights movement. So you'll see all those things unfold in the film. And also the DACA students, the efforts, to get people citizenship. That's all at the end of the film also. So he's been involved in all kinds of movements, which do the things that Bill Fletcher was talking about this morning, of trying to make the labor movement part of the movement, the larger movement, the social movement. And so what I'm working on right now with Harvard, where I was during the year, is a seminar in the spring on promoting nonviolence literature and curriculum. And also, I've got a book that will be coming out in January for the King holiday of, it's called Revolutionary Nonviolence, Organizing for Freedom. And it's by James Lawson with myself and Kent Wong from UCLA Labor Center. So that'll be coming out. And what I want to do is link the film and the book and try to get this infused into curriculum and also into union organizations and other organizations, because it's a very practical thing about how to organize. It's an organizing issue that nonviolence is part of. It's not just a spiritual issue. It's not, particularly about Gandhi and King, but it's partly about that. But as the book will say, it's about the steps of organizing and how to organize effectively. So if you could be thinking about that during the film, and you might have some ideas, and I see Joe Blake is with us, so she might really have some ideas, how to use this film and how to use this dialogue about nonviolence organizing, which is pretty much what unions do, pretty much what citizens organizations do. People don't go out there to fight a war. They go out there to change politics and change priorities and organize the workplace and so forth. And nonviolence is all about those steps. And, most people are nonviolent. They only fight back when they have to, when they're pushed to the wall. And so those are the ideas that I want to work with. And I'd be really interested at the end if anybody can make some suggestions in the chat box. Casey Wagner, our research assistant for the Labor Solidarity Project, will pick up any details from anybody. So you can put it up on the chat anytime you want during the film, and we'll get back to you. We'll contact you, and this is a project we'll be working on all during the next year. So any quick questions before we start it rolling? Okay, if not, Alex, why don't you roll it, and then we'll have a few minutes at the end.
Excellent. Let me just set up my screen share here. All right. Can I get a thumbs up from someone if you can see that? Yes. Excellent. Okay.
The concept of nonviolence is a 20th century term coined by Mohandas Gandhi of India. Gandhi also goes on to say that love is power. It's the most creative power of the universe, and it's the greatest force, he says, that is available to humankind, and humankind needs to learn how to use it. The laborer deserves his wages. I think wages of people who do the work is an essential ingredient of justice and of community. I think the human species was created primarily to learn to work. Physical work, intellectual work, artistic work, community work, social work. We have to work as human beings because it feeds our dignity. It feeds our sense of making a contribution. It feeds our sense of taking care of ourselves. And so all work has dignity to it, is what Martin King said.
All labor has dignity.
And so work is not primarily for wages, but we ought to be able to benefit from our work, especially the work that we do outside of the home and in the larger community.
They cannot support the simple right of the ordinary man and woman in this society to have the full dignity of their work and their wages. And we must begin to tell the Democratic Party, stand up and be counted for human rights and for human dignity.
Reverend Lawson's work is grounded in love, and it is grounded in a deep appreciation and respect for the dignity of all human beings.
People of our land need to ask themselves what kind of people we are, what kind of government we want for ourselves. Do we want a daily existence or an existence between elections that's primarily about the enhancement of the powerful and the rich? Do we want growing chaos? Do we want more violence? Do we want to increase poverty and structural poverty? Or do we want to be a people where we can see the bonds of human affections appearing, in which we become more and more connected to each other across every kind of human division?
And so that comes across in his sermons, it comes across in his lectures, and it comes across in the human interaction that he has with all of the workers that he has touched.
Violence is the use of power to harass, intimidate, injure, shackle, kill, destroy. Sexism is a form of violence. Racism is a form of violence. That's structural violence. Slavery was kept in place by violence. And my contention is that while many people may have the power to do such things, I maintain they have no right to do such things. Domestic violence in our homes is a major factor in the instability of millions of our children and millions of our families. And often that domestic violence is directly linked to what the work is that the mother or father are able to achieve in their homes. I think that mass incarceration in the United States the last 30 years is an example of institutional violence that is economic and political and social and is rooted in fear. What is nonviolence? Nonviolence is trying to use the power that life gives you in ways that solves problems and heals you and transforms you and changes and transforms others.
Through Reverend Lawson's teaching, you will see the very conscious and deliberate integration of the philosophy of nonviolence through the campaigns, whether it is through worker mobilizations, civil disobedience actions, whether it's through direct action campaigns that have provided a framework to build power for workers who previously thought that they had no power.
We cannot do better for working people in this country unless there is a strong labor movement. The labor movement has to believe first in solidarity. We cannot win without solidarity amongst us. Whether you're a firefighter, standing next to a hotel housekeeper, we have to have solidarity across the board, which then leads us to, we've got to love one another.
You do not have to be religious to be nonviolent, but if you link life to your very birth and beyond, you can discover the power of nonviolence. It is a force more powerful. Grew up in a climate, an environment of love and truth-telling and music and talk and education, and I felt quite comfortable in my skin from a very early age. The most significant moment in that, I think, occurred when I was in the spring of my 4th year in elementary school. When a racial slur was hurled at me, I hit back, and I fought back. For the first time, I recall telling one of my parents about this, my mother. She confronted me, asked me the question, "Jimmy, what good did that do?" Well, that encounter convinced me, and I heard myself making the decision, never again will I on the playground or on the street use my fists. So the Bible has always been a major document for me. I've read it back and forth. In that document, I see the way of love, way of truth, beauty, and the spirit as of utter importance to the human family. A part of all that is, too, who I am. By the time I finished college in '52, I knew that we Negroes had to launch a major campaign of nonviolence because what we were doing at that time was inadequate to change our plight, our scenery. 1955, I met Martin King in the Montgomery bus boycott in the front pages of the Nagpur Times, over BBC, over All India Radio, everywhere. I realized that's what I'd been looking for. And Martin King and I met, shook hands for the first time on February the 6th, 1957, after my return from India. And as we visited, we felt a deep kinship, deep relatedness. And In the process, we talked at length. I said when I finished graduate degrees, I would probably move south to work. And he said, don't wait, come now. We need you now. I told him quietly I would come south as quickly as I could. Moved to Nashville and landed with a job as the Fellowship of Reconciliation offered me the Southern Secretarieship, which meant that I came with a job and a title.
Tonight we have a most important business to try to accomplish. A good friend of mine in Alabama here last
And King and some of his cohorts welcomed me with open arms. I think one of the legacies of the Nashville movement would be the fact that King called the movement the model movement up to that time. And SCLC and Martin King used that imagery in future efforts, in campaign after campaign. We became folk who worked directly with King, with citizenship schools, with workshops on nonviolence and the training of field workers, which I did annually for SCLC throughout that decade. Some of us became advanced staff people for places like Birmingham, Selma, Alabama, and elsewhere. So you had year after year major struggles that moved in one way. There was no major source directing this, but it moved mostly as organizations and people organized and wanted to advance the cause of freedom and justice and equality.
We've learned from this to us as to how we might act nonviolently. What are the basic problems here?
I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
The Birmingham campaign is one example. In 1963, we went on week after week, day after day. Sometimes there's such crowds in the downtown area that one could hardly move through them. The city, by and large, ceased to function. And the net result was that President Kennedy himself got the act and began to demand a big business.
The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law.
I have a deep appreciation of Reverend Lawson's leadership in a critical period of time in the 1960s during the civil rights movement, and in particular, his historic contributions to the Nashville sit-in movement, to the emergence of a new generation of civil rights leaders who changed the course of history throughout the South, the Memphis sanitation workers strike. His role in that historic period was powerful.
We shall not.
The Memphis sanitation strike, these 1,300 black men who walked off their jobs without warning to anybody, but made the decision themselves and for their families.
We shall not be moved. We're fighting for our freedom, and we shall not be moved. Fighting for our freedom.
And no matter how you dress it up in terms of whether or not a union can organize, it's still racism. For at the heart of racism is the idea that a man is not a man, that a person is not a person.
For them, I am a man meant I'm going to treat you with dignity and expect you to treat me with dignity.
You are reminding not only Memphis, but you are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages.
And Our power has always been in ourselves and in our people, and in our unity, in the courage that we have to say no to racism and injustice.
Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
And before I be ashamed, I be buried in my grave.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
Martin King and I talked at length in the year before he died about this, and we were in very much agreement that we had had good success, had not dismantled racism. The politics of assassination greatly diffused us and shocked, I guess, many people and caused many people to drift away, not work on what would have been necessary to maintain the dynamic movement. Well, I don't think that you're meant to forget. You're meant to endure. You're meant to persevere. You're meant to keep breathing, keep taking a step, and keep leaning into the future. And I really think that perseverance and what that does to strengthen life, give life care and love and truth is more important than anything else. But in my work in labor in Los Angeles, where I started working with Local 11 and Maria Elena Rosso, when she at 23 became president of Local HE 11 at that time.
It was in the 1980s when Maria Elena Rosso led a campaign to successfully.
Okay, sorry about that. I've had a couple people contact me about the glitchiness of the video, so I'm actually going to
change the culture of the hotel workers here in Los Angeles.
Okay, sorry about that. I've had a couple people mention the glitchiness of the video. I'm going to attempt to stop the share. Somebody recommended that I sort of stop sharing, reshare. Just see one participant can share at a time. Oh, optimize for video clip. Okay. Apologies for this. Hopefully this looks better. But let me know in the chat board if it's still not coming in clear.
Los Angeles, she became the first Latina to lead a major union. And she worked very closely with Reverend Jim Lawson to infuse the philosophy of nonviolence and to build a rank and file led union of hotel workers, the vast majority of whom were Latino immigrant workers.
It was in the first big battle that we had that I met Dr. Reverend James Lawson. And it was quite extraordinary for me personally. We had tried strikes, week-long strikes, day-long strikes, delegations to the employers. We had just done so many different actions. It took a lot of courage from the workers. And so we called on Reverend Lawson, and we called on Cesar Chavez to come and speak to us, to help us figure out how do we keep going at this.
So I suggested, among other things, go to them, get them to talk about their situation. And you work with that person until that person then is really talking freely with you and is beginning to share with other workers and with all sorts of other people his own scene. There has to be deep preparation in nonviolent struggle. Because they have to understand the strategic value of goals which are measurable and attainable as a way of corralling all your resources and not getting confused and not allowing the nature of the struggle to move you off goal, off target.
And that moment, it was a very telling moment. It was a very important moment when the two of them together spoke to us about staying on course, of not giving up, and giving us examples of their own lives and historic moments. And it made a very big difference. When you don't know all the details, some really specific plan of all the steps you're going to take forward, it's really important to have the inspiration, but also the vision of what our society would be. And the sacrifice and risk began to involve getting fired. That was a big risk. Maybe even getting deported and getting arrested. And so these were other levels of sacrifice and risk that we had not thought of doing before.
And police have become one of the major sidetracks of activism in the United States. So we did a series of workshops on taking the police out of being the issue. And so Local 11 then, in their strikes and in their pickets and all, became where formerly they'd been were being roughed up and treated harshly by police. They turned the police around.
Reverend Lawson talked to us about if we had a cause that was bigger than 50 cents more an hour, was it a cause that was bigger than how many rooms were the housekeepers going to clean? Those were very important issues because they reflected the dignity and the compensation that workers deserve. But did we have a bigger idea of what we wanted to do? Did we have a bigger idea of what kind of change we wanted to make?
The Justice for Janitors campaign was launched here in Los Angeles that successfully reorganized the janitorial industry in Los Angeles and brought a new generation of Latino immigrant workers into the U.S. labor movement. If you look at the janitorial workforce, decades earlier, it was a predominantly unionized African-American workforce. And when the building owners decided as a cost-cutting measure that they would no longer hire janitors directly, whereby they would contract out the janitorial work to the lowest bidder, that change led to a severe displacement of unionized African-American janitors and instead brought in a whole new group of non-union, low-wage Latino immigrant workers. And it was through Reverend Lawson's guidance and teaching that he said that this is not the fault of Latino immigrant workers.
You do not fault the workers that they're fearful of the job, poor paying as it is and tough as it is. They want to keep the job for the benefit of what little food they can keep in their house and their shelter.
The course of action is not to lash out at the new workers who are working in these substandard conditions, but to organize them and to improve their livelihood and to improve their condition.
I think that also taught us that what we were out to do was not to be angry and to hate anybody. It was for our own dignity. It was for our own cause. It was for our own humanity, and that's how we were going to convince others of why our cause was so important.
This is part of the dynamic of nonviolent struggle. You get your demands straight
through these two campaigns, the Justice for Janitors and the Hotel Workers, we saw a major transformation of the culture of the labor movement here in Los Angeles that forged labor community alliances, that focused attention on organizing the new working class, especially large numbers of Latino immigrant workers, and began to use the power of nonviolence through civil disobedience, through street demonstrations, through mass mobilizations, direct action, and disruption to challenge the power forces, to recognize the inherent rights that workers had. So I see those early years in the 1980s and early 1990s as really pivotal in terms of the transformation of the Los Angeles labor movement.
The nonviolent tactics taught us that there are a lot more allies out there than what we start out thinking. We think we're the only ones, and then we expand, and then we expand. There are a lot more people who believe in the dignity of work, who believe in humanity and being fair and being just, then sometimes we start out. Sometimes we start out very narrow-minded. So the attitude of love and forgiveness allows us to think about all the people out there.
America has never had equality economically in this nation. We have from the beginning impoverished Indians, impoverished Appalachian whites, impoverished coal miners, impoverished black people, impoverished women. We have from the beginning followed our European roots with inequality. So to pretend that we once have had equality is nonsense. Well, you do not have civil rights or human rights if you do not have economic justice. We have an elephant in the room. It says the economy is primarily for the wealth and power of the few, that the economy is not supposed to be shaped by democratic ideals. It's so very, very important for labor to understand, and working families and working people to understand, that the economic order that slams them, diminishes them, insists that they are but slaves or property or a commodity or a thing. So labor must of necessity assert no.
The history of immigrants and the U.S. labor movement goes back many, many generations. And the reality is that many of the first unions in this country were built by immigrant workers.
If I was starving to death, if my kids were in front of me starving to death, you think I would sit there and just watch that happen? I would move. I would do anything. I would fight like hell for my kids to survive. And that's what immigrants do from all over the world.
I came here at the age of 9, and I started school here in the 4th grade. My mom had left Guatemala because she had to take care of all of her sisters, and it was really difficult for her to maintain a job that paid well and to support her family and myself. I realized that education would be my way out of poverty and my way to support my family.
Moving to Los Angeles was really, really hard. Actually, we moved into in the city, Alhambra, and it was much different then. It was really expensive, and the only way to afford it was to be living with a lot of people.
I met Jim Lawson in 2009, so I was fortunate enough to take his class in the spring in 2009 at UCLA. The class was Nonviolence and Social Movements. Oftentimes we are taught, in immigrant communities and low-income communities that we are destined to live in a world full of violence, that's the only option. And this was just like so fitting during my experience at UCLA as learning about different political movements and social movements and organizing with undocumented students. It was really important for me to have an organizing philosophy that made sense and that was compassionate. And it was just such a gift to have Jim Lawson be on campus and share his experience with nonviolence. And I saw how other political systems and other political philosophies used fear tactics and used violence to get what they wanted. So I wanted something different. And for me, it was nonviolence organizing that made sense. It was the only thing that made sense.
There are 11 million undocumented immigrant workers in this country who are locked in an apartheid-like existence, where they are denied basic rights as workers and basic rights as human beings because of their undocumented status.
I understood that my language was a barrier, but then even as I got older, I always had the resounding no, that I understood that I was also, my parents call it sin papeles, meaning no papers.
How could it be that in the wealthiest country in the world, those workers who plant and pick the fruits and vegetables that we eat each day are paid poverty wages and are poisoned by pesticides in the fields and are forced to live in shantytown?
In the middle of the 20th century, we were on our way towards recognizing the human rights of every worker. The Chamber of Commerce and other forces have risen up to begin the terrible assault on unions, to destroy them, to abolish them, and to take fundamental human rights away from the worker. So today in the United States, the worker literally has no rights.
The presence of 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country undermines the labor standards for all workers. And so that's why our fight to demand that they be allowed a pathway to citizenship and full rights as workers is crucial to lift the standards of workers across the board.
A part of the resistance in the United States today is a resistance to keeping the United States from becoming more democratic.
After the janitors won their victory, after they reorganized the janitorial industry here in Los Angeles, they made a very conscious and deliberate decision to go after the security officers who were largely young African-American men to bring them into their union. When you go today to meetings, you will see gatherings of Latino immigrant janitors and African-American security officers. And they may not speak the same language, but they are clearly united in their mutual demand for justice and dignity for workers of all colors.
What a real labor movement should be about is whoever's in that workplace should be represented, should have equal rights, and be treated exactly the same way. And nobody should be deprived of any rights. I don't care your sexuality, your country of origin, your immigration status, or your nationality or race. You all should have exactly the same rights. Love and forgiveness expands the reason why we engaged in these tactics or in these actions. That yes, it was about doing better for each of us, for ourselves, but it was about doing better really as a much broader community.
Many of these same issues with regard to integrating immigrants back in the 19th century are some of the same challenges that we face today in the 21st century.
So where do we go from here? I think that the most important soil that you and I must cultivate is to lay the seeds for the movements of the 21st century that will reclaim democracy for the United States, that will reclaim justice, reclaim equality. I think that we have to lay the seeds by which we can take government out of the hands of the oligarchy and out of the hands of the military and put it back into the hands of truth and the beloved community.
What has now become, over the last 20 years, it has now become more a part of our culture to have an attitude of love and forgiveness and inclusion versus you're the enemy and we're battling you than I have ever seen.
Too often, labor has not recognized its responsibility to help working people reaffirm their dignity.
And so that love and that solidarity for social justice, it has to grow. It has to become bigger. More unions have to do it. More parts of our labor movement that aren't doing it have to do it. As we're successful, the whole country is going to be better off.
I've not sought fortune or fame or popularity. I've sought far more a kind of integrity with truth and mystery and beauty. And I think that the way in which generally I've been organized most of my life, it's that ambition that has also helped to keep changing me, transforming me, and giving me courage, and waking me up in the middle of the night and sending me forth.
Through Reverend Lawson's work, he has shown the power of uniting the vast majority, that he is speaking for the interests and for the needs and for love and compassion for the vast majority of people within our society. Through his teachings, through his work, through embodying the philosophy of nonviolence, he has shown in theory and in practice the power of nonviolence.
We have to have in the United States a massive nonviolent movement such as the earth has never seen before in the 21st century that will allow us to confront the addicted people of violence and wealth and shake them up and encounter them enough that we begin to reverse these policies of death and begin to create policies of life. At the ordinary local level, there are all sorts of policies of life and love going on. Nonviolence insists that ends and means are the same thing, that we do not have control of many of the consequences of our behavior. But if our behavior is true, if our behavior is loving, if our behavior in correcting wrong is right, if our behavior uses good means, we sow the seeds for the consequences that will bear the fruits of righteousness and hope and peace.
Control the democracy of America and make it possible for every boy, every girl, every man, every woman, wherever they live in this nation, to achieve the full status of their humanity. Nothing less than that is the fight that we have.
All right, excellent. I have seen this documentary probably half a dozen times, and I still get goosebumps from that final speech from the AFL-CIO convention. Just amazing speaker, amazing life of service and vision, and just unbelievable integrity. And a fantastic documentary celebrating the life and the work. So I'd like to spend the balance of the time. We've got about 15 minutes, which is great, to just have some Q&A with Mike, and not only about this project, but about his projects moving forward.
Joe has a good comment. Can you just verbalize that?
Sure. You know, we're always talking about immigrants, and it seems like in some way we look down on immigrants, but it's immigrants that have made the changes. What did they say? What did he say? Immigrants were the ones that started the unions. And Gandhi, you know, and I kind of like looked and I saw that. I was wondering why why Lawson went to India, because he was a draft dodger. and he went to jail for 2 years. But then he didn't sit and hold on to that. He went to India, where he learned so much, more about nonviolence, and then he brought it back to us. And we're grudge holders. We're angry. We don't want to do anything but hurt someone else. But when you get so much more done. I loved it when he said the part about his mother said when he hit the person, what did that accomplish, basically. And we can learn so much from not holding on to things. First of all, we know that when we carry anger, just as a group, it's like a big brick on your shoulder. And only person that really hurts is you. So when you're able to forgive, and nonviolence is really about forgiving. So that's my verbalization of what I'm saying here.
Beautiful. I just add a little note to that. This film was made with money from the Fetzer Institute in Michigan, which is spreading the philosophy of love and forgiveness. They're not a religious organization, but they have a spiritual theme. And the reason this film exists is that I was on a labor task force with them, and we were supposed to give out money, which I've never been in that position before. And I said, well, James Lawson would be a perfect love and forgiveness person, to examine. Maybe we should make a book. And they said, why don't you make a film? And that's how this all happened. So Maria Elena Durasso, you notice somewhere in the film, she says love and forgiveness. She's saying that for a reason. This is, part of the basis of the film.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I was wondering, I was like, what made him decide to do this particular documentary?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it was not easy. I'll tell you what, he's on the move. It was not easy to corner him.
I bet.
But another interesting note is a lot of that speech making, not the AFL-CIO part, but a lot of the other speech making, he's actually in Tacoma. So we brought him to Tacoma in 2008, and we filmed everything. And it was with the idea of using the transcriptions to make a book, which now we're doing that as well. Okay. But the idea is he's a person who isn't necessarily very well known except in the movement. And he's 92. So when he's gone, how are we going to pass this on? And he has this remarkable linkage of labor and civil rights through his whole life. And a lot of the civil rights people did great things, but he's the one who really linked it to labor. So that's what we're trying to do here with the film and with the book, is to, when he's gone, these teachings will keep going.
That's one of the things I love most about the documentary, is how it establishes that through line from the civil rights movement to, contemporary labor issues that are currently pressing. I think I remember in one of your books you mentioned the idea, this idea of like how we remember King matters, right? And if we only remember King as a civil rights leader and fail to sort of recognize the relationship between the civil rights struggle and the broader labor rights struggle, we're really doing a disservice, or kind of compartmentalizing that sort of movement in history, when that, the struggle continues, obviously. And I think that the documentary just does an excellent job of kind of tracing how, the work has never stopped. It's just sort of evolved and taken on new forms. If anything, the mission's sort of expanded the stakes of its tent, right?
Well, I just got to say one thing when you say that about us talking about him as a civil rights leader, but just remember how he died. He died going to deal with labor and a strike. So if you took it from that point going backwards to forwards, labor is definitely one of the key parts of what he represented.
Yeah, I just think, the legacy of King often sort of like, works to kind of efface that part of his legacy, right?
Well, I just gotta say one other thing. Until I became a part of labor history and the association, I just thought that Dr. King was about African Americans. I did not know that he represented all the other cultures and ethnicities as well. So, you know, for me, labor history is like such a wide eye opening for me of who Dr. King really was, because I just had him in a small little box.
A lot of people think of him that way and quote this phrase, civil rights leader, really doesn't do justice to what King was, nor would it for James Lawson. He uses the phrase the Black Liberation Movement or the Black Freedom Movement. He doesn't like the civil rights title because then people think it's just about changing the laws. And you can see it's about that, but it's about a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And fortunately, a lot of people in the labor movement really see King as a labor hero now, you know, which is a change. And I think I was part of that with the writing that I did. That people, it wasn't documented before. The Memphis strike was not documented. And people said, well, that's where King was killed. End of story. No, you know, beginning of story. And that's Lawson's carrying that on. The reason he is so strong on labor is because he was the community leader in that labor strike in 1968. And that changed him, you know, into a labor advocate. You can see when he talks on the film how articulate he is about the labor issues.
We've got a couple of questions posed on the chat board. One that was posed during the film that I thought was really interesting. Bob mentioned sort of the role of the church and sort of a, the potential for sort of a liberation theology to emerge from the movement and why that didn't take hold. And then I see Tom has just recently posted something about, the current political environment and its effectiveness and the effectiveness of nonviolent protest. So I don't know, Mike, are there either of those that you'd like to speak to?
Can you make it a shorter question?
I guess, and Bob, feel free to chime in if you'd like to clarify. But the first question was more about the role of the church in sort of organizing.
Well, yes, and that's really important, you know. And Lawson, of course, is of the church. He's a Methodist minister in one of the largest Black congregations in Los Angeles. He's retired now, but he was a Methodist minister for 50 years. And he always said that labor organizing and community and civil rights organizing were all part of his mission as a minister. He saw it as his obligation. And it's because he's a social gospel minister. And when he came to Tacoma, we had him at St. John's Baptist Church and at another Black Baptist church in the community. And he really spoke to the ministers about what social gospel means, you know, and it's not pie in the sky, it's about now. He was really good about that. So I think there is a entry into the religious community for labor. And of course, you know, unions have been trying to do that for years. And I think the film speaks to that as well.
Excellent. And then Tom had a question about just kind of how the current political environment, do you see it as sort of a space where nonviolent protest will continue to be effective? I think watching the documentary, there's many things look familiar, the sort of violence against people of color, the coordination of state and capital. One of the things that over time doesn't look familiar is just the level of the threat of state violence and sort of the militarization of our own, police forces.
I kind of worried about in the film, he says, we took the police out of being the issue. And so in the current sensibility, people would say, how can you take the police out of being the issue? Because they are the issue. But what he's saying there is that they are not the issue. They're the gendarmes, they're the enforcers, they're the ones who come down on us, but they're just cogs in the machine. What is the social economic basis of the violence in our society? And he lays it out very nicely in this film. What is violence and what is nonviolence? And I think we really, really need this now more than ever for people to get a handle on, you can't neutralize the police, but how do you deal with this incessant violence, there are some tools that nonviolence provides. It's how you organize and how you talk and how you reach people. And, you know, he's very much about that.
I had a quick question. I don't know if the other questions were already answered. Is it okay for me to ask, or?
No, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry. Well, I was just really, you know, the film just opened up a lot of questions for me, but I wanted to kind of return to that original question, Professor Honey, that you mentioned at the beginning about the steps of organizing, how to organize effectively. And it got me thinking about, because you were asking about making some suggestions, and I think the film is definitely a step in that direction, right? Because it is in itself about educating people about nonviolence, about what it is, and about Lawson, what he's done and his efforts that actually impacted the efforts for immigrant rights, which was just astounding. I had no idea that he had done that work. And so I mean, I found it very, very interesting. And it was interesting as well because I recently, about a year ago, did a public interview with farm labor activist Dolores Huerta, who did a little bit of work with Lawson, I believe.
Yeah.
But two of the things in the interview that came out that were really important for her now, and she's 86, 87 years old, and she's still alive and kicking, and she's just an amazing force to be reckoned with, a lot like Maria Elena. But she mentioned two things that stood out. One was placing more leaders in our interests that represent our interests in positions of power locally, of course. And she does a lot of work in Sacramento to do that in legislation and otherwise. And also she mentioned education, and I just wanted to bring up education. I wanted to ask about Lawson if he had made any of those efforts in education, what his role was. And also as one of those jumping off points to think about how to continue on with this, because it really is, and I agree with Dolores talking with her just in terms of the Trump administration and how it gained so much political power and so much general agreement among a lot of people. I mean, we saw that during the recent election. And one of the reasons she said is because, look, our schools are failing. You know, we need to educate, and education is the key. And I think maybe education itself is an expression of that love, of that nonviolence, right? To get people to think about love and nonviolence in and of itself, right? So anyway, I just wanted to add that, and then to ask about that if education isn't one of those paths, because for Huerta, it definitely is the future for her in terms of resistance, in terms of standing up against state oppression, is education, so that people can organize more effectively and also just to gain solidarity around these issues.
Thank you. And I see Casey is applauding. Exactly. Kent Wong is one of the major speakers in the film. He's the head of the UCLA Labor Center, and this spring they graduated 300 people through a course on nonviolence that he teaches with Reverend Lawson. They co-teach it. They've been doing it for 17 years. And Dolores Huerta was one of the speakers. And they bring in various people like that to speak. It's on, if anybody would like to look it up, that you can get it on Facebook. Actually, look up James Lawson on Facebook, and that course has been recorded and you can actually watch it.
That's wonderful. That's great to hear. Thank you for that.
So we're trying to create a matrix around education. And so the film is part of it. The book coming out is part of it. But how do we get that down to the grassroots level, such as you're suggesting, like K through 12? How do we get that into the schools? Yeah, exactly. That's just what I was thinking in response to your original question. It's just a very exciting film, and I think it's moving in just in an important direction for us all. And it reminds me at the beginning, listening to Bill Fletcher speak about, just this morning, how he was talking about this idea of freedom schools. And I think that is one way to spread the power and philosophy of nonviolence. And so this idea of education moving forward, and I'm thrilled to hear that Kent Wong and Lawson are doing that work now. So thanks for sharing. I think we could do something in Tacoma, really. We're sort of positioned. We've got the UWT, which is right downtown. It's, you know, links up into the hilltop. It's got a good education, School of Education. In the past, I've worked with the central administration on bringing events to the community and into the schools. And I think it would be great if we could figure out a way to institutionalize something like that through the campus and through the schools and in the community. And also the University of Puget Sound has a race and pedagogy unit that does this kind of thing. So we've got some pieces that we could put together.
Absolutely. I like that idea. I think that is definitely one of the ways to move forward. Just because they're just, you know, the awareness around this, like you're saying, how do we push forward with his legacy? I mean, this is it, I think, is really putting those pieces